All right, everybody, welcome back to the Rutgers Rant. Politi and Fonseca here. Lanny is off. Got a great deal to talk about. We're going to do some spring football, spring cleaning, spring football fun. Talk about some observations from practice. We're going to do some lacrosse talk because the lacrosse team has delivered on the scenario that we've talked about on this podcast. Signature win versus good but not great season. We're going to dive into that, but we got to start in the portal, Brian. We got a basketball player, a real live basketball player, Darren Buchanan Jr. I got to tell you, I was kind of feeling, and then you know who cheered me up? Brian Fonseca. I read your story about this. You were pretty positive on the pickup. Tell me what we're getting here with Darren Buchanan.
Well, first of all, we planned this podcast out by saying, well, we were going to wait until Rutgers finally got a player, but they're taking so long, we're just going to record a podcast anyway. And it almost as though the universe was conspiring to help us out at 6:30 that same night. Hours later, Darren Buchanan becomes a Scarlet Knight.
It all works out. It is beautiful. Happy ending.
Yes, for everybody. A rare happy ending for everybody. I understand why people see that pickup and feel uninspired. I think obviously 3-point shooting has been an issue for Rutgers forever. And you see a guy that shot 17% on threes last year. Understandably, I understand the anxiety. The key thing here, and we can speak about the portal situation at large, is that we need to recalibrate what the expectations are. You know, Rutgers and fans were getting a bit antsy that Rutgers was either getting linked to players they had no shot with or not linked to players otherwise. Rutgers was never, ever going to compete for these top tier players that are going to Kentucky and, Wisconsin and all these other places, right? Rutgers has to, as we said before, Moneyball approach their way to a successful roster. And Steve Pikiell told you how they were going to do it. They're going to get players that you watch and think, oh, he would fit right into the 2019-20, 2021 era. And Darren Buchanan fits it to a T. I have seen this comparison a lot, so it's not very original on my part, but he is Andre Hyatt, right? Like this is almost the exact same player, a little bit less good of a shooter, but it's a guy who's going to try hard defensively, has a lot of length and can switch defensively and has a motor, can rebound well, and is very physical, right? Like 58% of his shots last year were at the rim, and a vast majority of those shots were grabbing the ball at the top of the key and barreling his way to the rim and either getting fouled or making the shot. Right. So Rutgers is going back to caveman basketball. They're going to try to win games 42-40. And Darren Buchanan is one of the players that when they were linked with him, to me, it fit perfectly of like, if this is what Rutgers wants to do, we can argue the merits of it or not. But I think very clearly that's the plan, is they're going to try to play 42-40, rock fights, and come out on top. This kid fits that perfectly. So that's why I'm encouraged that he's the first guy they get.
Okay. Playing the other side of this for a minute here. He wasn't a starter on a mediocre George Washington team, right? Am I misreading this? Like he lost his starting. He had better numbers as a freshman, came out DC Player of the Year, 15 points a game. His role decreased sophomore year. George Washington got better as it did. That concerns me. The other thing, I don't know, but I want a wing player who can shoot. 23.9% from 3-point range. I mean, that's my second concern. And the third one, and the bigger picture thing is like, I look at this team and needing three things, and he doesn't give you any of them. Like you need someone to handle the ball. You need a point guard, unless you're going to go with the freshman, which I think is crazy, but you need a point guard. You need a rim protector. Okay. We're nowhere close to that. And you need someone who can shoot. So you have not checked any of those boxes with that. I get it. He is the first player out of the portal. But the one thing I've learned from listening to Gregory Vincent Schiano, change his middle name every time, is that when you're going into the portal, you're going to get guys who are going to start and play significant minutes, or you're doing it wrong. So this is a player that they're counting on to play 30 minutes a game. And I am just looking at this. And right now, the pieces I'm seeing in this puzzle, the next two better be good. Put it that way.
Sure. Well, I feel like I'm combating a lot of negative Nelly over here. Classic positive Fonseca has to put a.
You got to do it, of course. You got to be the happy one for a change. Yes.
I got to fulfill the stereotype that I'm always the homer with the positive spin. A few things there, right? Yes, you can look at the regression from last year. It is concerning. The spin would be he hurt his ankle midway through the year, and that kind of hurt him and hurt his progress. If you look at his freshman year, to your point, he had a really good freshman year. at George Washington and showed the potential to be a really good guy. I think Rutgers thinks they can unlock that, get that player back. As he said, as much as 247. Like that's what Rutgers wants, to get that player back and put him back, into that positive development pathway. Sorry, you said so many things that
The shooter,
right, okay. Yes, those are three very important things. The fourth important thing that you forgot to mention is they need to have bodies to put on the basketball floor. They have to have players that play, right?
Okay.
So they
But
can't.
we gotta aim higher than that, though, right? We can't. That can't be.
My point being, you can't just get players that fit those three molds, as you saw in last year's portal haul, right? Like they went after guys who fit the mold technically. Zach Martini was certainly a shooter. PJ Hayes, as we learned, all he really did was shoot. Like this guy is a basketball player who fits what they want to do. No, he's not going to shoot the ball, but he is going to defend, and he's a competent enough player at driving to the rim. And third of all, the football comparisons to me are always tough. I never really like to compare the two programs because they're two different sports. But to counteract that comparison, Greg Schiano could do that because he has this foundation across the roster of starters, especially last year. Defensively, his entire defense pretty much was back, and offensively, they plugged in holes: quarterback, wide receiver. They had a stud running back. Whereas Rutgers has no foundation whatsoever, right? Like they have two guys who have been here longer than a year. One of them might be your starting point guard, and JaMychal Davis, the way things are going, or I guess you could start the freshman, as you said. And the other one is a 25-year-old center that you really hope is your third center. So now they're at a point where they have to fill out the starters on the roster. It's hard to compare to what Greg Schiano has because he did a much better job building a foundation. Steve Pikiell is now building a foundation on the fly.
But he's got to. Darren Buchanan Jr.'s got to be a starter.
Yes,
you don't go in the portal.
No doubt.
Okay. All right. So then give me the rest of the lineup right now. I'll give you, okay. Darren Buchanan Jr., 1.
Yes. He'll play the 3.
Okay. Grant, 2. He's going to be your.
Yes. He's got to be your starting 4. Your starting 4. Correct.
Okay. JaMychal Davis is your starting point guard now.
Well, to your point, I think they should get a point guard out of the portal. I think this year's center is going to be point guard, where they're going to have a hard time finding a guy that can handle the ball at a high level and operate the offense. Obviously, I think you could find a guy that's better than JaMychal Davis or an incoming freshman. But I also thought last year they could find a starting center better than Emmanuel Bole, and then I got egg on my face in November. So I think certainly they should get a point guard, but let's play along with the scenario with what they currently have. You start JaMychal Davis or Lino Mark at point guard. Clearly, the major red flag that jumps out to you is that none of those guys can shoot. You can bank on Dylan Grant maybe having a positive improvement there, but he shot 20% last year. I agree. But again, we're going back to the central point here that we cannot forget. Rutgers is trying to win games 50-49, right? They're trying to be mini Houston. They're trying to just beat your face in and hope that you can't hit a shot because your left eye is hurting from all the defense they play on you. Mm-hmm. So I think to expect this team to suddenly get a bunch of scorers, guys who can shoot, is a bit misguided. Like that, if you set your expectations for that, then you're going to be a little bit disappointed.
No, well, all right. I agree with that point, but I'm setting my expectations on the fact they've got $5 million to spend, right? And what I'm seeing, and check me if I'm wrong here, but what I'm seeing is that money is not going to appreciably help them against the teams they have to beat for good players, which is, the doomsday scenario. Like you said, all right, don't panic. We spent all of last year not hitting the panic button early on because we think, a lot of time to go. Let's see what happens. I'm sorry, but I'm hitting it. I'm hitting the button immediately because I see a scenario right now where having this money is going to buy. Thank you. Please, doing. Hit the panic button. For those of you not watching on YouTube, that's the sound of Politi losing his shit about basketball on April 8th. But to the point, like I'm just seeing that the money that they've got is not going to buy them a better basketball team. It's going to buy them essentially what they got out of the portal last year, right? Like it's going to get you some pieces,
and without having the base and without 5-star freshmen,
yes,
which is the most important part in this equation. Now, okay, just because the Star Ledger printed a headline that they're armed with cash does not mean they have $5 million. Let's calm down.
What do you mean they don't? They definitely have $5 million.
We are rounding up to an extreme degree. I was told you round up once you get to 0.5. Like, let's do the math here.
They have between 4.5 and $5 million. Yes.
Well, okay, and that 0.5 to 5 is a humongous difference.
Well,
Now,
they've got 3 million from the university, 1 million from the tournament,
right.
and I believe closer to, from people I've talked to, closer to 5 than 4.5. Could be wrong. Somewhere between those two numbers.
Hey, listen, fair enough. What I would say is pretty much everyone else has at least 5 million to work with.
Right.
Or even more. So, yes, they have more than they had last year, a lot more, right? At least 3 times more. So does everyone else. Like what Rutgers is getting from the university, some schools are spending on their best transfer edition, right?
Yeah.
So again, maybe things change after the initial wave of the elite players. And when you're spending more in the bargain bin, for lack of a better term, there are more accessible players. I just think there was never, ever a scenario where Rutgers was going to compete for these game-changing guys. Jacoby Gillespie from Maryland, like guys of that high level that's going to make you say, whoa. I think Rutgers Portal Hall is going to be entirely Darren Buchanan type guys where you have to kind of squint your eyes, see the fit, and convince yourself that the sum of their parts, they're going to be greater than the sum of their parts.
Right.
Like they're going to be a puzzle that fits together, plays the way Peichel wants to play. And I will say this, again, if you're looking for a glimmer of hope, when Rutgers landed all these guys that wound up being one of the best players in modern program history, Geo Baker, Ron Harper Jr., Caleb McConnell, Miles Johnson, I cannot think there are many recruits outside of Cliff Omori and Paul Mulcahy where fans were like, oh my God, we got that guy. It was all kind of and then they became, obviously you don't have 4 years to develop them. I understand the counterpoints here. I'm just trying to do my job and try to give people a little bit of hope in some, glim times.
Yeah, I'm just seeing it right now. That the scenario you describe, they're going to win games 52-50. They're going to get these grinders, good dude, really good dude, Darren Buchanan Jr. We should mention that. All accounts, it's going to fit in. Culture dude, all that great stuff. We are building a team. The ceiling on that team is going to be what the team finished last year, 8-12 in the Big Ten.
Well, I think that's another important point you bring up, and I'm glad you did. People have to recalibrate their expectations as well. This team is not going to make the NCAA tournament. If you think they are, you're fooling yourself, right? Like that would be an incredibly positive surprise. As surprising as it was that this last year's team missed the NCAA tournament, it would be an equal surprise to me if they make the NCAA tournament. This season is about not cratering to a complete rock bottom, not becoming Seton Hall last year, finishing roughly where you finished last year. That to me would be the goal for this season.
But this is not how portal works, though. This is why I would, if I'm a fan, I'd be like frustrated, because the idea of the portal is you could get better quickly and you have money to spend, and that's the new thing. That's the latest hope that Rutgers fans are being sold. Is just wait, we're going to be okay when things even out here in the portal. With the revenue sharing and $5 million, and we're going to be able to spend. You're telling me, oh, no, wait, but that's not going to work either. We haven't even gotten here yet.
Because the premise is built on like this hope that the NCAA is suddenly going to have an enforcement arm on the additional revenue on top of revenue sharing. And yesterday, I didn't watch the entire hearing, but one of the tweets that stuck out in my mind is that the judge that's residing on the case is like, I'm not so sure about this clearinghouse thing, which was the foundation of the entire theory that Rutgers is going to be able to compete in the modern era. Because if the clearinghouse doesn't work, then all these schools that already had $5 million in NIL are going to add that on top of the revenue sharing. Kevin Willard has like 8 to 10 million. Louisville has like 8 to 10 million. Rutgers may have 5. Schools have double that money. And along with the money, we have to consider where this program is compared to its competition. Wisconsin was just a 3 seed in the NCAA tournament. And Greg Gard is a guy that's been there and proven he's won a Big Ten title, right? And that's just an example that comes to mind because they've done really well in the portal. When you're deciding between two schools, do you want to go to that team? Or do you want to go to a team that just went 15-17 with 2 NBA lottery picks and is clearly advertising, we're going to play caveman basketball? Like it's hard to convince guys that aren't wired to do that, right? There's 2 schools that play caveman basketball that to a high level. It's Houston and Rutgers 10 years ago, right? Like that's just not an attractive thing for these guys. And then you add the fact that you're not going to overpay for these guys, right? It's one thing that, hey, come play caveman basketball for $1.5 million versus, hey, come play caveman basketball for at best what another school is offering you it's a hard sell.
Okay. So all right, I hear what you're saying. I'm gonna take it to the next thing. I will buy the idea that this is a good piece of a puzzle. Can you give me any indication that the next piece of the puzzle is going to be the guard that he needs and the rim protector? It's better than Ogbole. Are there any signs out there that those players are available? Rutgers can get them and afford them.
I can blindly tell you and give you blind faith. I am not aware of those guys currently. There are 2,000 guys in the portal. There's probably a guy I have never heard of. The thing with Darren Buchanan too is like he was randomly reported to be trying to have visits between Rutgers and Mississippi State last week. Then radio silence for 4 days, and during a dead period before visiting anywhere, he commits to Rutgers. Right. So sometimes these things happen on a dime.
They gave him a number and said, "I hope that's what happened." They said, "This is the number. It's now or never." I hope that's what the decision was. I don't know. Could be wrong.
I don't know. Anyway,
I'd like to believe that we operate that way, but who knows?
How interested was Mississippi State, really? Right? Were they a leverage play? Like, it's impossible to know. But I think, are they out? Is there a rim protector out there that's better than Emmanuel Obole? I sure hope so. Is there a guard that can come in here and operate the offense to a decent level? I hope so. I'm in wait and see mode, but I'm also not in panic mode because it's been 2 weeks and they should do something, right? I think there's the idea that if it's taking this long, like they're never going to be any guys. I think we should kind of pump the brakes on that because it's not about how quickly they get a guy. It's about, do they get the right guys that fit? I think Buchanan fits that mold. I think if you get a center that fits that mold in May, that's perfectly fine.
Mm-hmm.
Winter workouts don't start till June. I understand the answer of maybe that guy is going to go away. Maybe some other team is going to swoop in and get him. If there's a team that's swooping in and getting these guys anyway, Rutgers had no chance. So I'd say just kind of relax when the commitment comes, evaluate it. Don't be worrying about the timing of all this is what I would say.
Yeah. Okay. That's nice. I'm still mashing the panic button. All right, let's talk some spring football. We are down there at spring football and actually watching spring football, apparently. This is something we get to watch stretches. If you think that we've got these great observations based on watching them work out, well, yeah, that's not happening. But you've done some good interviews. You've written some good stories about it. You're down there. So let's give me some thoughts. Give me some general vibe, first of all, from what you're hearing from football.
I mean, it's spring football, right? So everyone's kind of generally feeling pretty good. New beginnings, new faces, mixing in with the old guys, new staff defensively, a lot of things happening. So the vibes are good. A lot of questions on my part, though. I'm curious about what's going to happen at left tackle. Tyler Needham is working there currently, according to Greg Schiano. He's your best tackle, so it makes sense to put him there. I think barring them adding a guy in the transfer portal during this next 10-day window, which would be a bit surprising given the price of left tackles, quality left tackles, that seems unlikely. So if they do have Tyler Needham starting at left tackle, as I would expect, the question is who becomes the right tackle, right? Is it a guy like Taj White who played some, left guard and played tackle in the past? Is it another guy? Is it a guy like Shedrick Rhodes who's missing the spring but has had a year to kind of develop some strength and was a starting right tackle in the MAC against Ohio, who Rutgers is playing in the fall? I think that's now the question is the tackle positions after having a guy like Holland Pierce starting there for 50 games in a row and establishing himself there. It felt like 50 years. Now you have to answer that question. I'm also curious about life after Kyle Monangai. I asked this multiple times, and it was kind of brushed aside, but CJ Campbell he caught more passes last year, 40, than the entire Rutgers backfield did, almost twice as many. They had 21, right? So you could tell me that you've had guys like this in the past, right? Like Jashawn Benjamin. Jashawn Benjamin had 3 catches last year, right? Like it's one thing to have a guy. It's another thing to have a guy that could do it at this level. So I'm curious to see how his skill set changes the dynamic of the offense, if at all. Like is Kirk Straka going to start throwing the ball more out of the backfield? He said that he changes his offense year to year, although his philosophy stayed the same. I don't know if his philosophies include never throw the ball to the running back. I guess we will see in the fall.
It's interesting because it's not like Kyle Monangai couldn't catch the ball.
He wasn't a great pass catcher. Let's be honest. He did a lot of things well. Catching the ball out of the backfield was not.
How many we don't have? I can't remember like a huge sample. But to your point, it's not like they were testing him and he kept on hitting him in the helmet. I mean, like it wasn't a big part of the offense. I don't know if it was because of Kyle Monangai or because of it just wasn't something they were going to do with.
Right. Well, I think it's because of the personnel they have. Kirk Straka was very forthcoming about using the personnel they have, their skill set. He talked about learning what Dymere Miller does well during training camp and trying to tailor routes to that, for example, right? So I think Kyle Monagai had 14 catches last year. I don't think it's because they just forgot that they can throw the ball to the running back. I think it's because he was their best running back by far. They wanted to have him on the field as much as possible, and to accentuate his strengths, they gave him the ball and told him to run, or they didn't give him the ball and told him to block. Those are the two things he did really well.
Right.
I'm curious to see how CJ Campbell changes that. I'm curious to see about the pass rush. They added two really elite guys in Eric O'Neill and Bradley Weaver, who have a lot of production at lower levels. I'm curious at the G5 level. I'm curious to see how much that translates. Chris Eisman asked Rob Smith about the pass rush in general, and he kind of, danced around the question, talked about how it's not just the edges, it's about the entire operation. Like, can the guys cover in the back end to create time for the defensive line? Yeah. I think obviously the key here is, do they have two guys on the edge, like we believe, that can win one-on-one battles and get to the quarterback?
Right.
And how much will it help to have guys like Mo Toure back, a guy like Jordan Walker, who played really well last year, Jordan Thompson? Do they have these two guys as difference makers there? That's my curiosity.
I got to tell you, the Eric Neal thing's fascinating. I loved your interview with him, because it's just like, Rutgers fans are going to love him. If he play, they're going to love the way he plays, because they haven't had that in a while. But if they dive into just the personality and some of the stuff he said about just being like wanting to play here and the Rutgers backpack. I mean, tell me, if fans didn't read that, tell me about your interview with him.
Right. So he talked to the media at large, not just me, just to be clear. I want to give credit to my colleagues. So he was from Staten Island. He played at Paramus Catholic and at Tottenville, which is a school that Rutgers used to really go into a lot, right? At least a couple times during the Ash era. And he went on a visit to Rutgers as a junior. They gave him a lanyard. They always, it's part of the things they give to recruits, I'm assuming. And he just kept that lanyard on his backpack everywhere he went. Throughout the halls of high school, he just had the Rutgers lanyard. It was a school that you'd hope a lot of local kids feel like, when you get into football and you want to become a Division I player, Rutgers is kind of that beacon for you. It certainly was for him during his very winding journey. He goes from high school as an unranked player to LIU, which is FCS, dominates that level for 2 years, 2 years. Goes to James Madison, which has clearly become this pipeline of group of 5 talent, where they get these guys, identify them, and develop them into really, really good players at the G5 level. And as we saw with Indiana last year, they move up to Power 5 and are really good players. I think Rutgers obviously hopes that they get similar production there. But when he goes into the portal, the guy had 13 and a half sacks. That's a lot of production, and that is going to attract a lot of attention. Bill Belichick was recruiting him. Oklahoma was recruiting him. There were heavy hitters with a lot of money going at him. And this is not to say Rutgers doesn't have money, but I certainly think that the allure of coming back home, playing close to Staten Island, and going to the school that you have some emotional connection with, he said that he always felt like it was his destiny to play at Rutgers, which guys say things similar to that all the time, but I think that one certainly has a little bit more oomph than the I always dreamed of playing at Rutgers, whatever. So I think, yeah, to your point, if he plays with the intensity he showed at James Madison, with a little bit extra for playing with the block R on his helmet, I think Rutgers has a chance of having a really, really, really good player at a position that they have not had in a long time.
One other guy I wanted to talk about, because you got a chance to talk to AJ Surace. And to me, it's interesting, like in this day and age of college sports where, no one's waiting for anything, just to see a guy who is the quarterback of the future for this program. They believe it. He believes it, but there's still a level of patience there, which to me is really interesting. And it looks like the backup quarterback battle between him and Johnny Shepard's close from what you've written. What did you hear from Surace?
He said all the right things, right? I think he is very much a quarterback, and he says nothing controversial, and is very he follows in Ethan Kaliakmanis' footsteps off the field as far as interviews. I think Rutgers fans will hope he follows in his footsteps on the field just as well. Yeah, to your point, you usually don't in an era now where guys programs are filling the quarterback position with the portal every year. Like, these elite programs are just getting a guy 1 year rentals. Rutgers is clearly having a guy develop in the wings, and he's buying into it, and he's learning from Ethan, and he works well with Kirk Shiraka. I think he understands it well because he's the son of a FCS coach, a Princeton coach, Bob Surace. So he kind of gets how this whole thing works. He's not exactly Arch Manning, to be clear, as a player, but the same model, right, where he's waiting behind this longtime starter. And I think in an ideal world, next year he is the starter. In an ideal world, he beats out a Johnny Shepard in the spring. Greg Schiano said it's a tight battle. A Johnny Shepard is the leader as the incumbent. And for AJ Surace to earn the job, he has to take it from a Johnny. If he could pass that test, whether that's in the spring or in training camp, then you feel like he's going in the positive, in the right pathway of his development, he's at a point where you can hope that by next year, you hope Ethan Kaliakmanis gets through another season injury-free like he did last year. And then in 2026, you have a guy, a former four-star quarterback, 3 years into the program, has learned the system, and can now plug in and become your next starting quarterback. That would be the ideal scenario, and that would save a lot of money.
Yes. The developmental program thing that Greg Shannon talks about. We'll see if it can happen. And if it happens at quarterback, you're absolutely right. To not have to be in the portal in a year to find that player will be enormous. Enormous. All right. We'll be back. We'll talk some more football on next week's show before the spring game, probably, or after spring game. One of the two.
Spring game is in 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Now,
So.
next week's show, we could talk about the first scrimmage, which they have on Saturday. Right. They have this Saturday, the following Saturday, and then the Saturday after that is the spring.
All right. Well, we'll get some more. We'll have some more insights that you won't be able to talk about after that. All right, let's talk lacrosse because this is fascinating. If you hadn't seen this, I'm sure you have. 8-6 victory over Maryland, number 2 Maryland, the biggest victory in Rutgers lacrosse history. I don't know what the second biggest is. Rutgers was, and this blows me away, 1-37 against Maryland. I mean, holy poop! That is a lot. That is a wow. So to beat them, to win that game at home, the videos are great. It was clearly celebrated as it should. And it goes back to what we were talking about. It's so funny. A couple shows ago, somebody, I don't know how it came up, Pat gave the scenario of, would you rather be 7-5 next season in football, a respectable 7-5, or 5-7 with a signature win over a big team? And this is what the lacrosse team is, right? I don't know what the record is off the top of my head, but they're about 500. They're
6-6.
They're 6-6. So they're going to need to win the Big Ten tournament to go to the NCAA tournament, which means they're going to need to beat Maryland after not beating them once in 38 years. They need to beat them twice in 3 weeks. Seems unlikely. So that's what this team is. This is the scenario we talked about with football, which would have been Rutgers having a win over a Penn State, but not being in a bowl. And it's kind of fascinating. I wonder if fans see this. I mean, on the surface, it looks like, yeah, this is great, but I don't know. Is it still kind of unfulfilling to be like, all right, you beat Maryland, but your season's going to end in your next loss, right? Is that?
Well, a few things. Again, it's not exactly a one-to-one comparison. Well, first, this is their biggest regular season win by far. I think obviously winning in the Elite Eight of the NCAA tournament to go to the Final Four is the biggest win in program history. I digress. I just wanted to point that out. I think the equivalent is not exactly our scenario because they lost 2 games in the non-conference portion of the schedule that they really shouldn't have against Stony Brook and St. Joseph's. That would be the equivalent of Rutgers losing to Miami of Ohio.
Well, that would Ohio. But that's what it would be, though, right?
No, but our scenario was they win every game they should, right? They win their 3 non-conference games. They beat, Minnesota or Iowa, and then they beat one of the juggernauts, right? So it's a bad season in the sense that they missed the bowl game. It's not a bad season in the sense that they pull a Chris Ash and lose to a MAC team. You understand what I'm saying?
Okay, I guess, but I think however you get to 5, and you have lost 4 of the other. All but 4 of the other 11 games, I guess, is what I was trying to. Yeah. Correct. So it doesn't really matter which ones they are to me. Right.
Right. Sure. Okay. And I think the other thing is like a big win in lacrosse is not the same impact as people only pay attention to the lacrosse team if they make the NCAA tournament, aside from the diehards. Right. So I think this doesn't have the same impact because they're not going to make the NCAA tournament. And
for lacrosse fans, it's just pretend it is the same thing. Pretend it is equal.
Maybe I am trying to talk around the subject because it conflicts directly with my view of football, and it kind of destroys my point. But I think we're comparing apples and oranges here.
It's as close as you're ever going to get.
Well, if the feeling I have about this is what I would feel about football, I would clearly just prefer to make it to a bowl game because this to me is very unfulfilling.
Okay, right. Yeah, that's kind of how I feel. It's funny. Yeah. And what makes it unfulfilling is the fact that you're sitting there, you're like, all right, you had this win and season's going nowhere. That's what it would be for football. And I'm not saying it wouldn't be great to have that victory. And let's just say it's Penn State, because it would come in the last game of the year, but you would be 4-7 at that point in our scenario. You would have lost a lot of games. You've lost some. I mean, I don't, Iowas and Purdue's, and you've lost some against some Big Ten teams you thought you were supposed to beat. You've lost those games. You're going to feel really bad for a very long period of time heading into that game against Penn State. Then you're going to feel great going to the offseason, but you're still 5-7. It's just interesting. I don't know.
Yeah. I guess we could always be right. We could both be right in hypotheticals, right? There's no way of
Yeah. But I think you
but
need a 7-5 and a win. That would be the ideal season. That's not the scenario.
I think it's defensible position. I still think that beating Penn State would just it would be so much different than every other 6-6, 7-6 year. You know, I just maybe people feel different when they're in Charlotte for the Duke's Mayo Bowl. I don't know, but to me on paper, I think a big time win would be just so much more. Well, to the point about us not talking about lacrosse until they make the NCAA tournament. We're talking about men's lacrosse in the middle of April because of this win, right? So this one clearly had some impact outside of the bubble. So right. In a similar effect, times 100, that's the talk that would happen if Rutgers were to beat Penn State and knock them out of the college football playoff or knock them out of the Big Ten title game.
That is another. See, that's another wrinkle of it. If it did do that if it did end Penn State season, yeah, I could see how that would be better than the Duke's Mayo Bowl, unless of course the mayonnaise is going over Gregory. I can't even come up with one on the top of my head. Gregory
You've used up all your Italian names.
I've used up all Gregory Vito Sciano. All right. Just a fun debate. Anyway, good win. Congratulations to the lacrosse team for having the biggest win. What will be the biggest win of the season for Rutgers athletics? Right? Is there a second?
Good question. I mean, barring them making a huge run to the NCAA tournament, which as you pointed out, would be very unlikely. Yeah, the fact that's even potentially the correct answer is pretty alarming.
I can't even come up with a second correct answer, so it's got to be the correct answer. What's number 2?
I think people should take the day off when the Directors Cup standings come out because it's gonna be brutal. The second biggest win, I mean, maybe Washington, just as far as like the hope. I mean, Washington wasn't good, but the feeling after that win was certainly up there. The biggest win of basketball season was probably over up and down Illinois team that was ranked. I'm not even sure. Has Rutgers won an NCAA tournament game in any sport this season?
No.
That I can remember.
They've only been in a couple, so I don't think so.
And when you say the Washington, when you're referring to the Rutgers gymnastics program breaking their 2-year drought of Big Ten meet wins, right?
That wasn't the one I was talking about. About Washington football. Well, the gymnastics team did not. They could have had one of the bigger wins. They did not beat Clemson.
If the Rutgers gymnastics team was a revenue sport and we were covering it the way we cover football, I would say and have written that they choked it away in the 4th and final rotation.
Whew.
But they're not, so I'm not going to say that. But if it were, I would, because they were up entering the final rotation, which for them was the balance beam, which is their best rotation. That's their best thing. That I struggle to come up with a 1-to-1 comparison, but that's a situation where you feel like you should win. Clemson is in its second year as a program, second year, and
really
just a tough one to swallow.
You try to. It's like the beam is like 2 inches thick. You try. You try to stand on that and do some flips.
Anything
you do it.
Anything these girls do on the gymnastics floor is the most impressive things I have ever seen in my life. I marvel at their athleticism, their grace, their balance. It's remarkable. Their strength. These girls are all 10 times stronger than I am, no doubt. But
they blew it. Just say it. Don't be afraid. They blew it.
They choked. They choked big time. No doubt. And I feel bad because some of these girls that had a rough time are promising freshmen, and in the big moment they just couldn't come up with it. But that's the reality. If we're going to treat gymnastics as a big time sport, we'll say it. If this was the SEC, Paul Feinbaum would be on the horn right now talking about how the Rutgers gymnastics team blew it. That's what I would say.
All right, let's take your questions. And in case you thought your opinion here about like, hey, things are okay. This is a good pickup. The questions seem to reflect a different level of emotional status with the basketball team. As you can imagine, people are not as excited about the current state of the portal situation here. got a lot of questions like this. Is the floor for next season like Eddie Jordan bad? EJB. Eddie Jordan bad. I'm going to say this. No, I think that's not going to happen. But Steve Peichel, the staff is that Eddie Jordan teams were poorly coached and lacked effort. I don't think you're going to see that. I really don't. I think this program is beyond that. You're beyond 3-17 in the Big Ten. You're at the point now where I think the floor of the season is like 6-12 in the Big Ten. If it goes below that, I'd be surprised. I guess that's how I look at it. You disagree? Could it be worse?
6-14. They play 20 games now.
6-14. Right. What did I say? 12?
Yes. So I think we're overcorrecting, right? People feel gypped from last offseason where they had all this hope and this team was going to be so good that they are now like trying to shield themselves emotionally. Like, oh, this team is going to be the worst, worst team in the history of the program. I agree with you that even if they do have a bad record, right? It's one thing to have a losing season. It's another thing to lose by 50 points at home to Purdue and get mollywopped by Michigan State. Like, even if they lose a lot of games, I don't think they'll lose as badly and as embarrassingly as Eddie Jordan. So by that virtue, they will not be Eddie Jordan bad. I have said 100 times before. I will probably say it 100 times between now and November. The worst this team could be is Seton Hall last year. They finished like 7-23 or 30-24, whatever. They can't compete in the Big Ten. They lose one or two cupcake tomato can games in the non-conference portion of the schedule. That to me is the floor. And to me, the ceiling is like being on the absolute fringes of the bubble.
That's Eddie Jordan bad, though. You just described that Seton Hall team for Rutgers. If it's that is it. That's EJB.
Again, EJB would be being 7-24 and losing every game by 27 points. Like, don't even bother showing up to the arena. Bad. I think this team at its floor is like not going to get results, but they'll be in games. They'll win a couple games they shouldn't. Like, they will be competitive in the sense that like the game isn't lost the second the ball's tipped. Like those Eddie Jordan teams lost. The only reason they won a game that one year was because Minnesota had 4 guys and 2 of them were walk-ons. Like, they had Noah Vedral playing center for them or whatever. That was the lowest of low points. I don't think they'll come anywhere close. But record-wise, I certainly see it being rough.
Hoops roster question. What are the chances that we have a worse roster next year than we had this year? By that I mean 1 or 2 decent players undoing supporting cast or worse. 100%. The roster's not going to be as good next year. That's my odds right now. You're losing. I mean, there's no question it's not going to be as good as this year.
90%. The top end talent will be nowhere near. Obviously, you're not going to have Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey. We're forgetting how bad the rest of the roster was, right? If they get a center with a pulse, that will be better than last year.
Could be better. You lost the center with a pulse, I would argue.
Well, a center with a pulse that does what Rutgers wants him to do. Lathan Somerville, which we can discuss, right? Since our last pod, we haven't talked about it. He's transferred to Washington. He is a really good player offensively, right? For a certain program that's able to accentuate his strengths, hide his defensive deficiencies, he will be a really, really good player. He's not a really good player for what Steve Peichel wants to do at Rutgers, right? So, yes, you lose a good player. I think if you get a guy that fits the mold of what Steve Peichel wants to do, if you could somehow get a worse version of what Cliff Omori was at Alabama, a guy that blocks shots, rebounds, passes the ball, and does nothing else, dunks, then you're at a better position at center than you did last year. I think the high-end talent for this roster is going to never, ever reach the levels of last year. I think as a collective, there's a 10 to 15% chance this roster is better.
Okay. All right. That's more optimistic than I am. I just don't see it right now. I would be very surprised if we're going into next season. You're like, you know what? Well, this roster looks better. I mean, but we'll see.
Again, the bar is on the floor, to be absolutely clear here, right? Like, I'm not saying this roster is going to be better than the best rosters at Rutgers under Steve Peichel. We're talking about rough roster with 2 really good players.
No, not 2 really good players. 2 top 3 NBA draft picks. I mean,
agreed.
Okay. All right. Hoops problems. And this is from the Discord. Max on the Discord wants us to rank these problems. All right. So you get a pencil. Rank these problems for Rutgers basketball. 1, not having enough money. 2, not having a good scouting apparatus to find value players. 3, not knowing how much players are worth. 4, not having anyone negotiate salaries. or 5 not really having anything to sell targets on. It's interesting. I mean, I think it's pretty close to that order. I think number 1 is still not having enough money, although um, I think there's some other things that are legit problems in there, right? Like um, Rutgers did a nice job of finding value players in the portal before. You mentioned Andre Hyatt earlier in the show is a great example. I think Cam Spencer is the best example of all time. That's 2. The
Kwasi
last,
Yeboah, Jacob
yep,
Young.
yep. It's been a while though. This is all pre. You'll notice this is all pre-portal, pre-paying players, openly NIL era stuff they have not been able to find a player in this era where you can throw money at it. So it's still not having enough money. I don't know if negotiating salaries is a big problem yet. We don't know because we don't know. If no one's handed me the salaries and go, wait a minute, what you're paying? How much for Darren Buchanan? Like we have no idea what those numbers are for the most part. I think we know that they make decisions based on player to player basis. Like, is there a grand scheme for what? I don't know. Like, is someone telling Steve Peichel that player's not worth the money, or is he making those decisions? I don't know. So I still think having that money is by far and away the number 1 nothing on that list. What do you think number 2 is?
Not having money is the root of all these problems. There's no getting around that. I think number 2 is a hard selection between not having something to sell. Because again, when you don't have money, you have to have something else to, whether that's developing guys to go to the NBA, much like Graciano develops guys to go to the NFL. That's certainly a side benefit that can outweigh the money. Having an exotic offense or a system players want to play in, that clearly is not the case. So that hurts them. But the other thing is like not having a good scouting apparatus. That goes hand in hand with not having money, because if you don't have money, again, you have to be really shrewd. And in an ideal world, you are scouting the Summit League, the Sun Belt. You're watching those games in January, right? And you have this department that's dedicated to that solely. It's not like every college basketball team has that, but I think a program like Rutgers, if they don't have a lot of funds to give to players, they should have some investment into that apparatus to be able to identify players and be able to be proactive in that sense, so that they can find these. Cam Spencer was, like your point, the perfect example of a diamond in the rough that almost nobody knew about. Rutgers discovered and put him into the limelight. That's a lot harder these days in the portal, but it's not impossible because there's thousands of players in the portal. There's bound to be 1 or 2 guys that get lost in the shuffle. And if you're in a position that you don't have the money to buy the really good players, you have to be in position to find that guy and swoop him up before anyone else does. I think those 2 kind of go hand in hand. And then the other 2, I think, also are kind of, it was not knowing how much players are worth and not having negotiating salaries. That's the part of the problem about not having a GM. That is, again, it goes back to the money. You only have so much money. You have to have a guy who's able to maximize what you have, because it's one thing for Duke to pay a guy $150,000 more than he's worth. It's a whole other issue for Rutgers to do that, because you do that to 1 guy, 2 guys, 3 guys. All of a sudden, you've just blown an extra $500,000 that you could use for another player.
Right. Great point. All right, and this is a good question from Twitter. It seems that a lot of men's basketball transfers are already committed to a school. And I think this came by that. I mean, right away, they're already committed to school. It seems tampering is now required to get players. Why is Peichel not comfortable with tampering? This is probably a byproduct of Hobbs, but he has been gone for a while now. It's fascinating questions. You're asking Steve Peichel to cheat. He's an honest guy. Like I don't know that he's wired that way. I will say this, Brian, and I come back to Hobbs and Pat Hobbs when he was here. Like there's caution. And then there's stupid caution. And Pat Hobbs erred on the side of stupid. Like, the road is 3 in the morning. There's no cars going. Pat Hobbs is walking to the corner and pushing the button on the crosswalk, to make sure he's not jaywalking. Like that's how I would describe. Like Pat Hobbs used like an obscure law that was put in place so Rutgers could buy players with 3 NIL as an excuse not to buy players in NIL. Like there's the whole thing was every excuse he could come up with. Like he was fighting against it, convinced that he had to follow some regulation that literally no one on earth was being as cautious as he was. That was wrong. Tampering is a different thing. Like, and I get it. It happens everywhere. There's some level of it. There's different ways to go about it behind the scenes. There's a lot of other people involved. But you got to be careful as well. Like, I don't know. What do you think about the tampering question?
Again, not to beat the Hobbs dead horse, because the other thing is also like it's the ethos of Rutgers. It's not like Rutgers was a place that was operating the same way as the big boys, and then suddenly Pat
Right.
Hobbs became a buzzkill. Like Pat
True.
Hobbs is an extension of the ethos of Rutgers, the standing back and letting other big time programs do things, and then when it's okay for Rutgers to do it, then putting your foot in the mud.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is another example. Like there are rules, but they don't matter if they're not enforced. If no policeman in the country enforced a 70-mile-per-hour speed limit, I would drive 70 miles per hour everywhere, right? Because it doesn't matter. You could say the speed limit is 70, but if there's no enforcement of that, then the rule doesn't exist. It's the same thing with tampering. Find me one program, one coach, one player, one person the NCAA has punished in the past 3 years for tampering. Name one. I dare you. You probably won't find it because I don't think they exist, right? So to that point, tampering isn't an issue. What is a recruit that you tampered with going to do? Call the NCAA and snitch on you when if you're tampering with a kid, that means that 7 other schools are already tampering with the kid. The kid is in a honey trap. He's not going to call the NCAA and all these schools. If you're not
Right.
tampering, you're not trying. Frankly, like that's just you're not competing with these schools. Like, yes, okay, you can sit back and say, oh, of course this school tampered with that player because 2 days after he entered the portal, before he took any visits, he was already going to
Right.
that school. Okay, maybe they were tampering. Who cares? There's no rules. So by not doing it yourself, you're falling behind.
I think the thing that the NCAA tournament taught us, and this is a bigger picture thing, but like the programs that are doing well are either the programs that have it all: Duke, Michigan State, the Hall of Fame coach, the tradition, the NBA legacies, the whole thing, the kit and caboodle, Cameron Indoor Stadium, those programs, or Auburn, Tennessee, Houston, right? The programs, Florida, the programs that have the money and don't give a bleep, the program, the ones, Kelvin Sampson, the ones who are like, who let's face it, have been flying loose with the rules for a long time. Auburn, another great example. I mean, so Rutgers is neither one of those programs, best you can say.
These are schools that will do anything to win. Anything. It's the equivalent of players that get floor burns and dive all over the place
Right.
and use every inch of the court possible to win. These schools will use any possible advantage to win, and they're essentially daring the NCAA to do something. I dare you. You know what? You're not going to do anything. They have figured out that the NCAA is a paper tiger, and some other schools are kind of just operating in this world of the 1980s where the NCAA and college athletics are sacred and we should follow the rules. And I think that leaves you behind, right? And I think especially at a place like Rutgers, where you already have so many natural disadvantages, you're hurting yourself by not pushing the envelope and trying to find the advantages on the edges that other schools are already doing.
Right.
To wrap around this whole thing,
Yeah.
Steve Peichel is an honest guy. He believes in the ideal of college athletics. And I think it's not in him to do something like that. I really think he would rather lose honorably
Yeah.
than to
I'm with you.
win
Right.
by cheating. I just think that's the kind of guy he is, which you admire as a person, certainly. I think that's a very admirable trait. I don't think that is conducive to winning.
Right. Yeah. And it's funny. And it's going to be a very interesting push and pull now within a lot of athletic departments in the country that have developed these large compliance offices where, now you've got a lot of people who are making good salaries enforcing a rule book that has been set aflame. And it's going to be fascinating to see what happens now, as you would think. And I don't know if we're going to see it at Rutgers, but now Rutgers is going to be paying, well, assuming that this whole thing goes through with the house settlement, which is another topic entirely, but going to be paying $20 million to players. You're going to make cuts somewhere. You would think that this arcane rule thing would be one way you could save money, but again, this part of the culture is built in. Like, these guys have, your great story from the what went wrong, the Rutgers, the Geo Baker event, dotting every I, crossing every T to make sure that no one touches a basketball at this thing when you're trying to raise $5,000 to pay, just stuff like that. It's sort of baked into the Rutgers culture, ethos, compliance, follow the rules. We got to do it the right way. I don't know. Yeah, but we're in a new world. I'm not sure what the answer is, but
We're in a new world, but the reality is that the good schools have always done things the quote unquote wrong way. There were McDonald's bags filled with hundreds of thousands of dollars at a local church in Mississippi, Arkansas, Alabama, Georgia for decades. Let's not pretend like this is new. It's just different. Okay.
it is.
And
Good
it's the
point.
same schools. It's not like they're brand new schools that are, like Alabama wasn't suddenly good at football because of the NIL rule. Alabama was winning national titles in the 70s and 80s. Okay. Like this is just different. Obviously, the only exception is schools like BYU that have these sugar or St. John's that have these sugar daddies that come out of the woodwork and now are able to do so legally. Because I just can't imagine Mike Rapoli 30 years ago would be handing, McDonald's bags of money. It's a little different. But other than that, the SEC schools that are good have been cheating. It's been whatever. The point is, like, this has been happening for a long time. This is just the latest edition of it. It drives me nuts when we act like this is a brand new thing. Anyway.
All right. We got two questions I want to touch on about renovations. Whatever happened, this is on Twitter from Patrick. Whatever happened with plans to renovate the rack? 2023 sent out a survey to ticket holders. We saw renderings. We saw the renderings, Brian. What happened? Another question on the Discord: has there been any rumblings about facility upgrades, player or fan facing? As far as fan facing upgrades, it seems like those are so far down the priority list now after NIL and team facilities. Yeah, I agree. I don't think anything's going to happen until the new athletic director is hired. And I guess this is a good time to do an update on that. I get the sense that this was when we thought we'd start getting some rumblings about who the next president's going to be. Mid-April is kind of what the timeline I thought. I have not heard any names. Usually you start hearing some buzz that they're getting close. They've kept it pretty well close to the vest, as far as I can tell. This whole search process, give them credit for that. Usually Rutgers leaks like come up with your own analogy there. But yeah, they've kept it pretty quietly. They did advertise now. It's great. Some people noticed that they listed a job for general counsel, not general manager. So they're trying to, there's so many jobs of the Rutgers administration that they have to fill. The top lawyer is another one. So once they get that, you would presumably have the president, he'd hire the athletic director. We'd be in a position. I think you're a couple of years away, though, from there being any meaningful work done on facilities, because that new guy's got to get in here and solve the immediate problem, which is, paying players, revenue, coach evaluations, before you can start making some decisions about what's going to happen behind the scenes with the rack. As we've written before, the former athletic director, Pat Hobbs, wanted to replace it. Like, I don't know anyone on earth who thought that was a good idea. I don't think but that's how that was the last thing that last thing someone in charge at Rutgers was doing, was talking to architects about building a new arena. That ain't going to happen. So yeah. I mean, I think you're right to think it's going to be a couple of years before we see anything.
The other thing is Pat Hobbs' priorities were with the basketball program. I'm not sure the next AD is going to be similar to Hobbs in that way, right? So
unless they hire the wrong AD.
Right. To that point, the priority would then flip from the rack to building a football practice facility, which should be the number one facilities priority. Greg Schiano has told us already, he told us last year at Big Ten Media Days, that that's not a priority. That's down on the list. And I think that's the reality for the entire department, because your number one priority now should be revenue sharing, collecting enough money to be able to pay players and have good teams, right? And then
I will disagree with you at one point. I don't think that that's the number one priority, right? I think finding revenue places to make revenue on the stadium that they're not exploring right now is the number one priority for me. Like, make money in your current building. There's got to be easy ways to do that. Easy ways. There's got to be ways to do that where you can, solve some of your revenue generating problems by getting corporate dollars into a building that only has the one place for high rollers to sit. That would be the one thing I would say.
Sure. I would disagree and say it's more important to have good teams to attract more people to the stadium. And once you build that foundation of fans, then you can start price gouging them.
We're done with the days of waterfalls and shiny trophy, entrance hallways. And yes. Rutgers missed that. Rutgers did not get that done in time for that to exist in 2025.
Right. I don't think they need a fancy indoor football facility. I think they need somewhere that if it rains too hard, it doesn't collapse within itself. I think that's the key. Touché. They need a building with infrastructure made out of cement and glass, and not whatever the hell the bubble is made out of, right? Sometimes I walk over there and I think if I have a pin and I hit it, the whole thing will explode. That's not really what you hope for in a practice facility. So to your point, no waterfalls, just a little bit of solid foundation.
Right.
I mean, look at Maryland. We've been to Maryland. I've seen their indoor practice facility. It is gorgeous. I don't think of all the programs in the Big Ten, you should be behind Maryland in facilities.
Well,
That's all I'm saying.
yeah, but they're behind. I haven't seen them all, but I would guess that they're behind 18 of them.
Yes, but that's my point. You can't be, much like Steve Peichel told Pat Hobbs often, you can't be last. And in that scenario, they are last. And now they were ahead of Maryland as far as a basketball practice facility because Maryland doesn't have one. Now Maryland is building one, which I'm sure is going to be nice and shiny. That's a whole other topic.
What'd you think of the hire in Maryland?
Buzz, I think Buzz is a good guy to come in, build a solid program, a good team that's going to make the tournament and give you a chance. And then he'll leave you in 5 years, which that's also nice to know that it's a short-lived thing. He's going to win a lot of games at Maryland. He's going to rub people the wrong way. I think his ceiling is, like a Sweet 16, but I'm not sure that Kevin Willard had much more to give anyway. So I think it's fine. What do you think?
I think it's an upgrade. Yep. From a coaching standpoint, I do. Yeah, I think they're going to be better eventually. I think he's already got the infrastructure. I think he's got what he needs to win there. So I think that was, absolutely.
Mutually beneficial, I'd say. Kevin Willard is much better at Villanova than he is at Maryland.
Mm-hmm.
Buzz Williams is he's trying to check off every state in the country. Like we're going to try to coach in Montana next. So that fills it for him. There's got to be something about Buzz Williams that rubs people the wrong way, that every 5 years, him and the school are like, all right, let's part ways. I think we're done here.
Right.
But I think he'll reestablish Maryland as a winning program, and then he'll set the stage for the next guy to come in and make Maryland a powerhouse again.
All right. I think we've covered everything. We forget anything you want to talk about before we sign off?
No, I think I would just preach patience. I feel weird being on the opposite side here, but I do try to course correct and I don't think people should fall too far off the deep end. I think if we get to June and the players they get aren't exactly on paper what people hope, then it's time to really throw in the towel. But I hate to be like the guy that we made fun of the entire season, where it's like, let the season play out. Let the season play out. I'm being the guy that's like, let the portal play out first, and then let's have our fun talking about the whole.
Let me see the button one more time. Let me see it. Push it for me. That's where we are, folks. All right. We'll see who's right. We'll be back in a couple weeks to preview the spring game, talk some more spring football, see who else to get out of the portal. Until then, thanks for listening.